Record. Yes, so, well, welcome everybody. My name is Christian McNeil. I'm based in Glasgow, for those of you who don't know me. And I'm delighted to welcome you, Kathy. I'm delighted that you're our second participant in this series of talks. I'm just going to ask if you join, would you mind muting yourself just so we cut down the background noise? And there will be plenty of chance for questions and comments. Thank you. Thank you. So, Kathy, I don't know when we met, a couple of years ago, maybe online, and you've been really inspirational to me, and I always find our calls very, they get into that kind of trancey state and very inspiring, and lots of things seem to come out of them afterwards. So I'm delighted that you're going to tell us a bit more about yourself. And I noted just one thing down from the preamble about today's talk, and one of the things that you were perhaps going to do is pinpoint important factors that can aid us sharing the principles elsewhere. So can I just hand it over to you to talk to that, or indeed anything else that seems appropriate?
Well, that's fine. It's great to be with all of you, and many of you I have not met, so we'll, in a very brief amount of time, get connected. And I think, Christians commenting about we've connected at a distance by phone, and it's been very meaningful, and it happened kind of in an out of the blue way. In a way, that's characteristic of what happens when we learn the principles, when we actually begin living by them. Things that we can't imagine do happen. So as I begin, I would like to just have you do just a show of hands like this. If you are presently teaching or facilitating the principles in some kind of a business setting or organizational. Okay? And so there's just one of you doing that. Is that correct? 2. Okay. 3. Okay. I think probably what will be helpful here is if at a certain point, Christian, you ask people to begin indicating to you that they have questions, and in our brief 30 minutes that we'll have, we'll try to accommodate some of that. When I began to think about responding to Christian's invitation, it occurred to me that what has been on my mind rather recently and very strongly really has been the matter of strengthening the 3 principles community worldwide. And that can be inside of one local business, inside of a family, wherever you're at. But this notion of strengthening those of us who are working on the same thing or hoping to explore the same thing seems important. And this morning, as I was sitting out on a bench down on the dock at our little Minnesota lake, I was having a cup of coffee, and it was one of those unusual, beautiful days where the water was still and you could see the lily pads, and there were, lovely clouds. It was really still. And at a certain moment, a really noisy crow started just making a horrendous noise in one of the large trees behind me. And I realized that I was sitting there being aware that that was going on, and in no way was it taking away from my experience of that lovely setting. And I was just kind of overcome with, very simple, clear gratitude for the opportunity, something like 25 years ago, to rather accidentally be introduced to the principles, and what a difference that has made in my life. There's a lot of gratitude for that. And in truth, I think that's the most important thing about strengthening the community of those of us globally who do this work, is if we can stay in that place of gratitude and appreciation, it's a whole different thing than being worried about trying to do something with what we know. And I'd like to, in a very simple way, just offer some, I'll just say, keywords that to me stand out as lessons that I bumped into here and there as I was doing my what was called systems change work, bringing the principles into collaborating school and community public agencies. So my business was not a private commercial business, but it was in fact systems change in large organizations for a long period of time. And I think this notion of gratitude has been critical to the success of anything that's ever happened in those communities. And it's the one thing that if you go to any gathering of principles, grounded individuals, all of us sitting here in this conference call, you could very easily begin to tell me what it is in your life that you're grateful for in terms of bumping into the principles. And Sid always used to say, that is the most profound feeling that we can experience. It is where we arrive closest to that self that we were created to realize and be. So that begins to suggest something to me about how we go about working together. And I want to create a chronological context here because, in a sense, I dropped into the picture roughly halfway into the history of the principles as a understanding, as an approach, as a way of life. And if we say that Sid Banks was doing his oral teaching in the early 70s, and it was not until 98 that he published The Missing Link. I came in at about 93. And during that time, there was kind of a moving of, if you want to call it, the geographic plates. That early era of teaching the principles had been very formless, and it was very one-to-one, meaning things were done in person, and there were not a lot, if any, materials for large parts of that time. And so it was a matter of, if we were to say, the folks in the community in Salt Spring learning firsthand from Sid and from each other. And then in the late 80s, we began to have people from the US and other places in the world showing up to assess what was going on and learn from it. And in that period of time, people began to write books before Sid was publishing much of anything. And so when I came on the scene in the early 90s, there was great conflict at times about, do we teach this as a formless spiritual understanding, or do we teach this as a psychological understanding of human nature? And I'm just going to, short circuit it and say there was a formless approach and there was a very form-based approach that were bumping into each other. That's natural. That happens in probably every understanding of any kind that ever develops. People begin wherever they're at to try and take it back to their particular environment or activity, their work, their life, and they make sense of it, however it fits them. What I've noticed over time is that this continuum of where one stands in terms of form and formless Are you with me on that issue? Are you familiar with that? Yes, all you have to do is nod your head. Okay, so you know where I'm at. As I have done my teaching of a graduate class at the university from 2002 until the present time, and as I've done community-based training for roughly 25 years, I have noticed that when people are committed to learning the principles, and they are in something more than a one-time presentation, they start at a point on that continuum of form and formless, wherever they are at. Some people come being very, very grounded in a, shall we say, a spiritual or formless, internal, reflective place, and others start in a very intellectual, analytical place. Does that make sense to you, Christian? Okay. And what I've observed is that over time, people become comfortable moving on that continuum. And they have their own words to describe what it is that's happening to them. So when Sid Banks talked about, we don't need to be worried about the words of how we teach this, he was really saying that there's an understanding that is already born into us. We are the principles. Every single human being can actually say, I am the principles. They're operating inside of me. Some people know that that's happening, and some people don't. Some of us want to share that and point other people to it. But the critical thing is, do we appreciate that this is a very, very diverse world? That the principles community is very small. If we were flying over the globe and looking down, we would see a few places in the world where we can say we have human bodies who understand the principles and they're trying to teach it and share it, right? And in order to begin to think about doing anything beyond our own immediate sphere today, we have to have some appreciation for the fact, I believe, that we all need each other in the principles community. And it doesn't really work very well if we are saying, well, there's only one way to teach this, or there's only one person that can write about it. We know that everyone sitting in this call today has had an insight, a new way of seeing something that none of the rest of us have seen. You know, that's a given. Everybody in the principles would say that's true, regardless of where you're doing your work or how much learning you've had. That's a fundamental beginning. If it's true that every person has that capacity to have a unique insight, and we're wanting to see our efforts grow and spread, then we begin by saying everybody has something to contribute. So that's why you and Jill choosing to do this session, Christian, is really important, because you're looking to draw in more voices and to not have it be restricted to, you know, a few who have been teaching in very visible ways. If you have a question as we're going along here, please, you know, at least let Christian know or wave at me like that, and we can make sure that we try to respond. At this point, I'm thinking back to some of the key simple things that I think it's important for all of us as a community, or you as someone who's wanting to take the principles into a particular realm in your world, to think about. The first is that we really will benefit by being inclusive, by cutting a lot of latitude for people to teach the principles consistent with the teachings of Sid Banks, if that's what you're committed to, but to teach it in each our own ways. And sometimes there are a lot of us doing it one way. But this thing about the continuum of learning tells us that we always have to be prepared to be open and listening to someone else so that we can hear it just a little bit differently, because there is no one way to teach this. There may be one way that feels right for me right now, for you right now, or your colleague right now. But I guarantee you, as I look back over all these years, I see people making progress for a lifetime. And what they thought was the way to teach it at the beginning is not the way they're teaching it today. We grow into that. And we learn that maybe we're not teaching. Maybe we're sharing. Maybe we're simply meeting other human beings who are already operating with the principles, don't necessarily know what to say about that or even how to recognize it, but with very little opportunity to be heard. They have amazing things to say. I remember one nonprofit administrator, and she just was in the early stages of learning, and all of a sudden she comes up with, well, don't go to MSU. And we all thought, what's she talking about? And then she said, don't start making stuff up. That was her way of saying, this is how I understand this. And it worked beautifully. And for years, we called Maureen the MSU grad. You know? And I've seen people, somebody running a Head Start program, the director, she had lots of people, very needy families, lots of budget issues, lots of geographic spread. And she was a very out there kind of person. And did a presentation for her staff. And then all of a sudden she's saying, you know how I clear my mind? I think about a leaf blower. And I'm going around, she's making lots of noise like a leaf blower in front of about 300 people. And she's saying, I'm doing that to myself to get my head clear out so I can hear all of you in a meeting. Now that's Jeanette's way of talking about it. But you know, it's that kind of richness, realness, that is important. Then I want to talk a little bit about, we have to share or teach or bring the principles. We'll be stronger if we recognize there are different contexts that people walk into. And those of you in business know this book probably well by now. Sandy Crott, Robin Charbet, and Ken Manning. They designed a beautiful plan, well suited for going into what I consider a significant commercial business setting. And it's well designed for that. It's very different than another wonderful book by Barb Ost, a school administrator, who simply talks about what it is like to live the principles in the environment of a school. And you notice the difference in size on these two books? That's important. Administrators in schools will say they don't have time to read anything. In business, you might have an ongoing program that someone would pay significant money for and expect, you know, a major text. Again, I invite you to raise hands if you want to raise a question here. I'm going to move on until we see somebody raising their hand to talk about something that Roger Mills used to say in the very early days. Yes, please. Greg, you'll need to unmute yourself, please.
Sorry.
Oh, I am actually, I've been running a,
Well, I think I want to kind of stress the fact that where we go with what we're wanting to do is it's really wise to connect that to what people want. You know, do you have roots? Do you have a place where someone is saying, I want to do this, as opposed to trying to, shall I say, take it into or impose it on the community? That's the first thing. And that statement that Roger made early on was really something from Sid. And they advised us so strongly in the beginning to look for not promotion of what we want to do, but attraction to it. And so I would assume that you have people who have said, we want this, or you believe will help you in bringing others who will understand what you're wanting to do and appreciate it.
Yes.
But you follow what I'm talking about, is not having such a vested interest in it that you're devastated if you took it into the community too early. We have to be invited in. And that's a matter of attraction. There's something about, over the years, and I don't mean this trusting naive, I mean being certain that I don't need to worry, that I have something of value. And if I take care of my own health, I will actually see the opportunities unfold in front of me in ways that I couldn't intellectually calculate or figure out. If you've got something of that feeling and you go in, and you're going in to see the health of the individuals who comes from the addiction and recovery area, see them with health, you're going to be offering something wonderful. Does that fit a little bit? We could talk probably for weeks about this. The worst thing I've ever seen happen is to, in some way, suggest or imply that traditional treatment programs or recovery programs are your enemy. And you do that by saying that doesn't work, or we work as well as. You don't really have to do that. It's talking about, are you looking for peace of mind in your recovery? You know, we can talk about that. We can support that. And obviously there's the wonderful book of Joe Bailey's, The Serenity Principle. Our time is limited. So if there's another question, raise your hand.
Thank you, Kathy.
You're very welcome. Thank you. One of the things is to think about what I call proof or data. And I was advised years and years and years ago to go and do my work quietly. And this is in a university setting, community-based. And don't overstate what I'm doing. And sometimes I've taken some existing published articles from inside of the Three Principles world too early, and they've been on the desk of someone who was a real scientist, and they didn't hold up to that rigor. And I lost a lot of funding because of that. So I don't talk about there being solid scientific researched evidence like let's say NIH would be familiar with. But I can say I've been doing this work this many years, and here are the things I'm absolutely confident of. And, you know, I won't reiterate those right now. And these are some of the emerging new articles that you may be interested in that are also pointing in that direction. I'm not negative about what we have, but I don't call it research and I don't call it evaluation. I will call it outcomes that I'm confident you can experience. That makes a huge difference. Sometimes I think historically there was a bit of getting too eager because we all have the tendency to be so excited about the wonderful transformation that happens for people. And if we overstate that in the wrong setting, you know, if you're going into a Fortune 500 company business, you don't want to be over-promising. thankfully, we're getting better at collecting what we do have as a whole community, but we're basically not an institutionally based movement. And until we have that, we really shouldn't try to use institutional words to describe what we do, if that makes sense. I think one last thing I'll just mention briefly, and then from here on, it's just questions. Knowing the difference between seeing teaching the principles or sharing the principles as your job and living in service while you are offering your teaching, your expertise at a fair price, if you need to charge for it, is important. Because if you've got the money coming first and the service is not there, that isn't consistent with the principles. When we live in service, we live with a fair amount of comfort that, and some people will call it a leap of faith. And it just means being at ease that you're doing something valuable and trusting the process of life, the power of the universe, if you will, to bring to us things that are an appropriate fit with us. I've ended up doing things that I could not have ever imagined. Here I sat, a little girl from South Dakota, grown up, doing what I'm doing, and I end up doing a week-long training at a school in Cairo, Egypt. I mean, where did that come from? It wasn't in my plan. I didn't even try to aim for something like that. So there's something about just really listening to your wisdom and knowing that you are more than equipped, if you quiet down, to be able to see the opportunities that literally open up in front of you. If you can get out of if I can get out of my worried mind about, will it be enough? Will it be fast enough? Will it be big enough? And as I'm clear, then I can see things that, oh, well, that's a natural fit. Certainly I can respond to this, or I can create that, or offer that. So Greg, when you're talking about going and doing what you're doing, if you see it as service and your heart is feeling right and you're being fair, when you think about if you have to have a cost, do that. But a lot of addiction and recovery folks can't afford anything. So then the agencies are where one turns, not the individuals, for the funding maybe. Okay. Christian, I'm going to invite you to facilitate drawing questions from people or asking your own. I see we have some time left. We're close, but
yeah,
your call, how much longer we go here. It's a very fast.
I know. And that was part of just doing, just opening up a slightly different format and just giving it a try, an experiment.
Absolutely.
I found what you've shared, Kathy, really beautiful, really moving, actually. Although you're talking about some practical and factual things, and I loved what you said. We all need each other, and it strikes me. And the universe needs us. Mind needs us to share this, and I loved it. Were you coming forward as though you had a question there?
Well, I was just going to say that so often I've seen, I'm going to call it the invisible people in the principles community, having some feelings about not being included or not being in the leadership role that they want. And I really encourage people to just let go of that. And for those who are in visible positions, to see that if we do not become inclusive, always, everywhere, we lose something. I think that's, my main concern is that together we really do better in achieving our goal than if we try to shape it and push it and direct it entirely. On the other hand, I think there's something that's really quite wonderful that's easy for everybody to get a hold of. And you saw that little document that Elsie Spittle and George Pransky collaborated with a large group of people to put out. What's in there is very accurate as to how I knew, the principles were best taught according to the way Sid talked about it. It's not necessarily the perfect, complete, final list. There are things to add. And that's the kind of inclusion that I want us to each approach this with. Greg or Anne or William, if you're seeing something that works for you or that you want to do, don't be afraid to offer that up, especially in this environment where Christian is bringing more voices to the table.
Yeah, and anyone who does want to put their name forward, just let me know or put it in the group. If you, Wim, were you about to ask a question? You looked earlier as though you were.
Oh, I always watch the faces, and I might call on Julie to see what's going on. I'm watching her face.
Julie, you're coming in. I'm going to unmute you.
I always say, I completely agree with what you're saying about everybody having to be inclusive. We've all got to work together, help each other, support each other, and accept each other and our uniqueness, our individuality, and we're all uniquely different and uniquely the same.
Yes.
So, yeah. I have just finished a 12-week program in schools with some children who maybe have been kicked out of the past 3 or 4, 5 schools. 15-year-olds and have the school's emotional, psychological and learning difficulties and educational ones. It's been an experience.
Yes. I so hope you will join us actually it's going to be September 14th. There's, the Supermind Educators Living in the Joy.
I'm doing that.
Are you part of it?
Yes,
Great.
I'm part of that.
Yeah, great. Oh, I'm so excited you're in schools. It's wonderful. It's a challenge. It's hard.
It really is, and it's amazing at the same time. The kids are great.
Children can knock your socks off. I remember one little kindergarten guy who was being taught the basics of the principles by one of the adults. And at the end, the little kid says, "You mean there are no burnt cookies?"
My daughter's sitting next to me here. She's 7, and a few weeks ago she said, "I've been thinking, the purpose of life isn't to be perfect. It's just to see what happens. Let it happen. And just move on with it."
Daughter, you get a gold star. That's great.
I think she came out with that all herself as we were driving somewhere in the car. It's not to be perfect. I'll try and be perfect.
See, no.
Life happened.
This is exactly the kind of lesson that's unique to a human being that is needed in the whole community. The more we do that, the more we grow and spread and have a good feeling.
Oh, she's taught me loads. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see. I see Annie is smiling there. What's going on?
It's great listening to you. The first thing that came to me was when you said you were very grateful for finding this 25 years ago, and I'm like that I'm really grateful that I found it now. And why didn't I find it 25 years ago? But at the same time, well, exactly. The point being that number one, I know that how important it is to share with other people who haven't found it in that time, or who could be waiting another 25 years to find it. And also that has given me the experience of what it's like if you don't find it in that time, and how you can be struggling and what you could be looking for and all of that stuff. So there are benefits both ways.
And I was old when I found it. I mean, I'm 71 now. So it was a long, long time ago that, you know, I was middle age when I began to discover this. And yeah, I mean, but just no matter what point it is, one is great. Yeah. That we teach or share the principles. The end result is gratitude, period.
Yeah. So, and it doesn't. I was thinking also that when you go into companies or into organizations and so on, and you're saying, well, I have all these years of, this is the experience I've had over all these years. If you haven't had experience over all those years, I mean, I have got experience, but not of the principles.
Yeah, and I don't think that the number of years has to principles has to be the issue. It's about your clarity, and about your own steadfastness in what you know, and then it goes back to, are you fitting it into the context? You know, if you're going into business, or you're going into school, or you're going into family, do you have expertise in that? I used to have educators that would say, I just want to quit my job in the school and do what you do. And I'd say, why would you want to do that? You're already getting a salary. All you need to do now is just embed the principles in what you do. I see we have a minute left, so Christian, it's yours.
I think we have less than a minute, and I'm just going to say thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here, for contributing, and most of all, Kathy. That was really beautiful, really beautiful for me, and I hope you all found that. So thank you, everybody, and we've got another one next week to be announced. Kathy.
I know.
Bye-bye. Good night, everybody.
Good night.